Do we have a nucleus of the Kundalini force in our hearts? And if we do, what is the nature of this hidden and to many, many people still a mysterious force? In this live presentation of the Golden Rosy Cross tonight, we'd really like to go deep in the subject, because honestly it is one of the main pillars of the universal teaching and of the spiritual path that we have open for us at this time and since the beginning of times. And since this is a live presentation, we'd like to invite you, since the very beginning of it, to start, making your questions and sharing your thoughts, your comments, because if we have time at the end, we would like to address all the questions possible. So let's get started. What is the nature of this hidden force in our hearts? This hidden force in our hearts has received many, many different names in the past, but they all indicate the same. The classic Rosicrucians called it the rose that should blossom and that should be put in the very center of the human cross. And that is really the true and very direct meaning of this concept of the rosy cross, the human cross with a rose in the center. In the East, it has been called the lotus flower, this flower that should emerge out of the muddy waters of our nature, indicating the human life, the human being that has a hidden and fabulous principle in him or in her. In old India, in ancient India, it has been called the Atman, the very universal principle of consciousness that lies in the heart of every person, of every human being. And in the modern school of the Golden Rosy Cross, we also give it a name. We call it the Spirit Spark, the Spirit Spark atom, this absolutely different and universal principle, the principle of a true self-revolution that can be ignited if we really devote our lives to it and we go through this transformation in our lives. But why is it that when we refer ourselves to this force using the name of Kundalini, and we associated calling it the Kundalini of the heart, why is it that most people tend not to know this? I mean, many people, of course, have heard about the Kundalini force, the concept of Kundalini, but it's really not that common that people recognize that we have a Kundalini in our hearts. Well, the reason for that is because we can describe this Kundalini force with three main centers or three main nuclei in our being. And two of them are relatively well known, one of them for sure known for many, but the third one that is in the heart is almost unknown. So let's try to address some of those elements now in more detail. Most of the people know that the Kundalini force is associated with our spinal cord. And many people also know, people that like to study the esoteric themes and issues. Most of the people know that we have centers of force alongside our spinal cord. We call those centers of force, or those vortexes of power, we call them chakras. And we know that we have 7 chakras, or 7 main chakras, alongside our spinal cord. What we know through the universal teaching is that we have one of the centers of the Kundalini force right here as a vortex, as a center of power, very close, underneath but very close, the first chakra that is called the root chakra. And throughout history, and especially in the East, people have developed some practices, some exercises to incite, to ignite, to awaken this Kundalini force. And the objective is to actually force this power, or this Kundalini, up in the spinal cord through the different centers, or through the different chakras. People can do that through certain postures, through respiration, through some magic practices. But the main objective here is to start awakening and speeding up these wheels, these chakras, because in Sanskrit, by the way, chakra means wheel, right? So speed up the flow of energy, and by doing so, the person or the adept of these practices would end up gaining some particular or special powers, like the power to manipulate the creative force of life, the power of healing, the power of projecting his or her subtle bodies into the astral sphere or etheric sphere. So these practices are known, and many people seek for those practices to find balance, to find equilibrium, to find health. So this is the most known aspect of the Kundalini, okay? The second aspect of the Kundalini that some people know is related to the top chakra that we have around here at the top of our heads. This chakra is connected with the pineal gland, and it's called the crown chakra. Other methods, instead of using these exercises to force the Kundalini from bottom up through our spinal cord and through the chakras that we have here at the bottom of our spinal cord, they utilize different methods. They utilize the method of concentration, of occult exercises, of trying to develop the hidden senses like clairvoyance, clairaudience, telekinesis, and so on. The end result is the same, is an acceleration in a certain sense, these wheels, these chakras. And the person starts gaining these hidden senses, these hidden powers and actually become, a magician, not a magician, but a person with a lot of occult power, a lot of personal influence. Many people seek for this. That is mainly, the occultist path, to try to find personal development, to try to find true knowledge, and to overcome the barriers of their own minds. But in essence, what happens when we put in practice these paths? Either the path of inciting or igniting the kundalini force starting from the root chakra, through what we have mentioned before, the sort of practices we said before, or the top kundalini that is around the crown chakra, around the pineal gland. The end result, dear friends, is that, as we mentioned before, that we accelerate the speed of all the chakras that are involved in these practices and these exercises. And what is the sense of this acceleration? The sense of this acceleration is to increase more and more the amount of energy that we can bring into our own selves. And that's the source of these powers. An acceleration of astral and etheric fluids or powers that come from the outside into our being, and that increase the circulation of power in all our spinal cord and in the systems that we have around it. In other words, we are strengthening our current state of consciousness. And since we know that our current state of consciousness is an I consciousness, an egocentric consciousness, the side effect of these attempts, of these practices, is to increase and strengthen our egocentricity even more. So that is why a spiritual path cannot utilize these practices or these exercises as a basis for a true transformation. Because a true transformation should really end up changing our current state of consciousness and state of life into something different than the egocentricity and the egotism that we display in our lives, more evidently or less. That is also why the spiritual school of the Golden Rosy Cross does not utilize these methods that we have just described. And here we reach the third Kundalini center, the third nucleus of Kundalini that was never touched here. That is the Kundalini of the heart. But to talk about that, we should start from a different perspective, because up to this point, the center of all the discussion was our ego, our I-centered consciousness, and the attempt of having a better ego, a more balanced ego, a healthier ego, or whatever goes in that sense. So we must start from a different and fresh perspective. One of the pillars of the universal teaching and also the teaching of the Golden Rosy Cross is that the Kundalini of the heart, that is also a very important and powerful center of energy, a truly untapped center of energy, is not necessarily part of the human personality. It is the rose, but the rose does not belong to the cross. The rose must blossom, become united with the cross through a process, and actually transforming the cross through the unification of both. So another way to put it is understand that this center, this spirit spark, this kundalini of the heart, is not only a center of power or a center of the kundalini itself, but it's also the center of the true instance of the human being, the true source, the true origin of our lives. That is the human microcosm, the true eternal being, the true original, or if you want to call it divine being, within which we live, but that we are most of the times totally unaware of it. So the human microcosm has its center in the spirit spark atom. And the path is actually to unite this universal original reality and our current reality. The reality of the human being as we know it, of the human personality, that is also a fantastic system and a very complex system, but it is in essence a phenomenon of time. And here we are not only referring ourselves to the physical body, that is certainly a mortal body as we all know, but to the second body, that is the etheric body, that is the energy layer that surrounds and also lies within the physical body and actually gives life to it. Also, the astral body, that is just like, a cloud of energy that surrounds us, which organs are the chakras, the 7 chakras. So the chakras are actually organs of the astral body. And the mental body, that is the youngest and is still in the process of being built by the human being and the human consciousness. So this is what we call the human personality. And in our current state of life, the human personality lives as an I-centered, as an egotist consciousness. And all its vehicles are a phenomenon of time. And if you try to develop the capabilities that are hidden or that lie in this personality by itself, without starting from the original point, without starting from the true center of the human microcosm, even if you start from the root chakra up, or from the crown chakra down, trying to develop magic capabilities or occult powers, you will end up increasing the separation and the duality of the human life. Because every additional power, be it occult, mystic, magic, it doesn't matter, that we develop based only on the personality, is just like another layer of bricks in this very massive and large wall that separates us from this true reality that lies within ourselves, that is closer to ourselves than our hands and feet, but at the same time, it's so far away, just like a distant galaxy, if we take into consideration our current state of life and our current state of consciousness. So that's why we must start from a totally different perspective, as we said. And what must happen then? We tried to make this so clear on the other page that we carry a dot now, but it's not a problem. What we'll try to briefly describe now is how does the process proposed by the Golden Rosy Cross works. But dear friends, this is actually nothing new. I mean, the Golden Rosy Cross is not coming to anybody with a different method. This method is the same method that was put in place or put in practice by all the spiritual schools of the past. Actually, the practices and the exercises that we have today are like shadows of this one original method. But what is missing is really the true beginning, is really the true source, is really the true center that we call the spirit spark atom or the kundalini of the heart. Well, the kundalini of the heart, or let me use the same dot here. The kundalini of the heart, or the spirit spark atom, is not a center of energy that is under the control of the human consciousness or the human ego. It does not respond to the will or the command of a trained ego. So it cannot be awakened. It cannot be ignited by exercises or occult practices or, magical practices, etc. Actually, it must become awakened by itself. And this is the result of countless lives of having this microcosm here tied to the wheel of life and death. So, in half of the cycle, the microcosm receives a human personality. It is born, it grows, it becomes an adult. Then we all grow old and we die. And then on the other side of the veil, that we tend to call heaven or hell or anything, but it's actually just the other half of this time existence, our subtle bodies, they also disappear gradually. And in the very end, we have the microcosm empty again. So this microcosm accumulates experiences in its magnetic sphere that we also know as karma. And through countless turns in this wheel, this microcosm starts to mature, starts to accumulate enough experience as if it was a fruit that slowly becomes ripened. So when this quantum of experience, this quantum of accumulated karma or lives, if you will, is minimally enough, this center awakens. And when the center awakens, it enters in resonance with the very center of our consciousness in our heart, the center of our identity, the center, as some call it, the center of our soul. And the center of the human soul, the center of the human consciousness, also awakes and starts to look for an answer, because life in that very moment becomes something very strange. All the personal goals or all the egocentric objectives, they tend to become something different. They lose their colors. It's shining. The person, the human consciousness, starts to look for something deeper, for something different. If this person actually starts a path based on that force that has already awakened in him or her, and not through exercises or practices, but because of a true yearning of the heart of the human consciousness, but also a yearning from the heart of the human microcosm, then that person can start a process of transformation. It is as if this kundalini, this vortex of power, started to gradually unfold. You may look at this as a vortex of energy, but you can also look at this as a rosebud that is blossoming. And this new center of power that starts to awaken in the human heart has the ability, has the capability of transforming the second center of the human awareness that lies in our head, in our consciousness, or as the universal teaching calls it, the sanctuary of the head, because that's what it should become. And when this power has grown strong enough to start transforming in a permanent way the center of the head, then it can also flow to our reality of life. In the region where our karma, the heritage of the past, the heritage, the biological heritage of all mankind lies, that is the sanctuary of life. And through the combination of this voice of the silence that resounds in our hearts and a new awareness that awakens in our consciousness, we can gradually start changing our lives based on it. Not through a forced attitude, but through self-knowledge. Through the yearning of the heart and through the self-knowledge that starts to awaken in our minds. And then a new attitude towards life, a new inner attitude starts to blossom, starts to rise. And then the circuit is closed. And after countless turns, countless interactions, countless cycles of this force that actually, dear friends, circulate through the sympathetic and parasympathetic system that is around our central spinal cord, we start to create a new system, a new serpent fire system as we call it, because our spinal cord and with the systems that lie around it is truly, the main pillar of energy, where the energy of our consciousness becomes the state of being of ourselves in our lives. This is what we call, in the spiritual school, a new consciousness, a new awareness, and a new state of life. It is the transformation of all the forces and all the power that actually circulate in the human being, but not through forced practices or through occult exercises that have the purpose of making the ego more powerful. Actually, it is a true self-surrender of the human ego to the true ego, the true ego sum, the true divine original particle that lies within his or her own heart, but also is the center of his microcosm. When this process advances, then a final transformation can take place. A transformation where, through the inflow of the universal energy that we call the spirit, through the 7 aspects of this energy that we call the spirit, or the 7 rays of the spirit, let me draw the 7 here, more or less, then all the 7 centers of our astral body can be transformed as well. And not only the astral body, but the mental body, the astral body itself, and also the etheric gown, or the etheric body itself, or the lines of force that actually create the superior part of the etheric body. And when this process is concluded, then all the 7 centers are transformed through the unification, through the true unity of the 3 centers of the kundalini force, based on the kundalini of the heart, that is Atman, the rose, the lotus flower, or the spirit spark in your heart. This path is the path that allows the human being to become one with a human microcosm. We hope that this brief explanation was useful to you in your process of your own quest, of your own path. And